My name is Angela. I'm a wife, mom, writer, and photographer behind the blog Crown and Countryside. Join me on my quest to create a slower life with natural food and homemaking.
Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to make a sourdough blackberry lemon bundt cake. And did you know you can make spaghetti with just one pot? I'll show you how. And we're going to make some pickled peppers, which are just so much fun to look at, soft sourdough sandwich bread, and a DIY fabric softener with just a couple of household ingredients. Stay tuned, we'll get right on it. So getting started on the cake here, I'm just mixing all my dry ingredients in the larger mixing bowl. As you can see, I don't measure my salt very often. I never measure out exactly how many teaspoons, but I always just seem to know when enough is enough. This little mixing bowl is just perfect for eggs. I guess my philosophy of vanilla is similar to salt. The sourdough starter goes right in there with the vanilla and eggs, and you just mix it right up. When you're mixing it by hand, it takes a minute to get everything totally blended. You can absolutely use a stand mixer for this too, but I have found sometimes with baked goods, sometimes the stand mixer over mixes it. I'm not great at knowing exactly when to cut and take it out of the stand mixer before it's over mixed. So I like to do this kind of thing by hand. But yes, a lot of people do use stand mixers successfully and make beautiful cakes with them. Here's the lemon. I wanted to make sure to add the lemons last because if you have ever made the mistake of putting lemon juice and cream in a cup of tea, you know what happens. It turns into cheese. So I wanted to be careful because there is a dairy content in here. Some of my Greek yogurt is in this recipe, and so I didn't want to add the lemon too early because I didn't want the yogurt to curdle, because cheese was just not what I was going for here. So I mixed it in with everything else, and I think it was successful because it baked beautifully. Didn't seem to have a problem with that. So I was just straining some of the seeds out and things with the strainer. But by the time I added the lemon, it was totally fine because it was mixed in with everything else. I just greased the pan with some extra grease from cooking that I kept in the fridge. It works really well. I was concerned because there's nothing more disappointing than emptying a Bundt pan and the cake breaks in half. So this was successful because the cake came out in one piece. So that was pretty happy. Now we are moving on to the spaghetti. I was just chopping the onion and putting the meat in. I sauteed the onion and browned the meat all at once. I didn't film all of it, but you can see the browned meat in the Dutch oven. Here's my tomato sauce. This is just plain tomatoes. It's unseasoned. There's not a lot to it. But it's really easy to season it, so not a big deal. This is bone broth that I canned earlier. This is the trick to making spaghetti in one pot. Spaghetti was already easy, but this is a life-changing hack. You add, I believe this is a 12-ounce jar of liquid, and it can be salted water, but bone broth is even better. And the noodles absorb it and it becomes spaghetti. So if you just have extra liquid in there, you can cook it all together and it eliminates a whole bunch of steps. So here's my noodles going in. I just clipped that rosemary from outside before making this. All right, now we're moving on to the sourdough bread. This is my starter going into the measuring cup. I have a 2-jar system that I use. There's a million ways to do a sourdough starter, but this is a system that I found works for me. I live near a river, so it's always first priority to make sure that flies do not get into the house, and if they get into the house, that they do not get into my sourdough starter. So my sourdough starter lives in the fridge for the most part, so I have to wait for it to warm up and come to room temperature to wake up again. Now for the soft sourdough bread, I add other things to give it a little bit more oomph. One of those things is eggs. The wild yeast likes the fat content in the yolk and helps it become fluffier. So I just added a couple of eggs here. Another thing that will make your bread fluffier is sugar. So I'm going to add some turbinado sugar here in a second. And I also, instead of water, I'm using whey. So that yellow liquid is the byproduct of yogurt. So I just stirred that in. The wild yeast loves the whey and just makes it so fluffy, and the bread turns out wonderful. I always have this moment of, is this really going to work? Even though I've made hundreds of loaves of bread. And trust me, it works. You just have to incorporate all the wet and dry ingredients until they're fully hydrated, and it turns into a lovely ball of dough. This is coconut oil. It's another thing that is not in my rustic sourdough bread. When you add the oil, the sugar, the eggs, all these different things, this is going to give your bread a good rise. I feel like this recipe is almost life-changing because the other bread is really good with soup or as a baguette or as like a, almost like a dinner bread. But if you want to make sandwiches or French toast or any number of bread products, this is the perfect recipe. So I was really excited to figure out exactly what makes the difference between the two different types of bread. Okay, here's the cake. When I'm doing a lot of things at once, I'm always switching back and forth between all the different recipes because they all have a period of rest. So I have to put one down and come back to it in a minute. So I'm just adding the blackberries to the top. I do think the next time I make this, I'm also going to put blackberries in the bottom of the Bundt pan in addition to the top, because I think it would have been nice to have the blackberries sink throughout the cake batter instead of all being at the bottom. Now here's the spaghetti coming out of the oven. The noodles are kind of on the top, but they've absorbed a lot of the liquid. So once I stir it, I'll show you what it's going to look like. And here's the cake before it goes into the oven. So I've pulled the rosemary off the top, and once you stir it in, it's just like spaghetti, but with half of the dishes. And as you can see, I had time to do something else while it was baking. I did not have to stand over the stove and watch it cook. So that was a real time saver. All right, let's see if it comes out in one piece. It's always terrifying to think that only half of it can come out, so it looks so good. Now, I made a few modifications to this recipe after serving it up, because even though it tasted just wonderful, I feel like it didn't rise like I wanted it to. It was slightly more oily than I wanted, and the bottom didn't make like that pretty crisp bottom like I was hoping for. I adjusted the amount of yogurt, flour, and butter in the recipe. So hopefully it would be a little bit more fluffy and a little bit less buttery, but it still tasted wonderful. It was almost there. Now here I am going to pickle some peppers. These had been sitting on my counter forever, and I was like, I have to do something with these because they're going to go bad. And that's the thing with fresh vegetables. If you do not process them, they're going to go bad. And if you don't want to eat all those peppers all at once, which who does, you're going to have to find a way to preserve them. So I decided to put all these beautiful, colorful peppers into jars. So I can't wait to use these over the winter in various different recipes. So the pot to my right is it's a pot of salt water. So I'm just throwing the peppers in there and letting them soak overnight. Now this is a DIY fabric softener. It's just vinegar and baking soda, which are going to release some harmless gases. And so I'm wanting those to fully incorporate with the Epsom salts and the vegetable glycerin. The salt is really what you want for your clothing to get that nice texture to it as it goes through the wash cycle. So here we go. Here's the baking soda, which is going to react with the vinegar. And really what you want is that good sodium in the water. So that combined with the Epsom salt is going to be a wonderful little laundry booster. Now I'm making a brine. This is going to be equal parts vinegar and water. And here I'm crushing the dill or slicing the dill. So I'm going to put the dill in each jar with the pickling spices and chopped onion and garlic. And once that is in the jars, I'm going to fill them with pickled peppers, top it with brine, and then throw it in the water bath canner. So it's a very easy process, especially if you only have a few jars. There's no need to spend a day and a half canning pickled peppers. That's ridiculous. Nobody has time for that. So just put in a couple of jars and you're on your way. And since it's water bath instead of pressure canning, it can just boil while you're doing other things. I think when you're pickling, onion and garlic add really nice flavor to really anything you're pickling, whether it's pickles or peppers or something. I think that onion and garlic really add a lot to it. Well, this is turmeric right here. Turmeric is a really healthy herb to put into your food. And here's salt. Salt is pretty important to the pickling process. I'm using an itty bitty baby spoon, so I put several scoops in each jar. But one of the reasons that salt is so important is because when you are fermenting purposely, like if you're making sauerkraut or fermented pickles, which we haven't done on the blog yet, or something like that, you use salt to keep the bad bacteria away while allowing the good bacteria to flourish. So salt is for flavor, but it's also for safety, because if one of your lids comes undone and allows oxygen in there, the salt should just cause it to ferment safely. However, I would caution you, if your jar pops open, I don't recommend eating the food inside, because you never know, if there's not enough salt or anything like that. But it's an extra layer of security in case something were to happen. I just want to look at the jars of pickled peppers all day because they're so pretty. This is actually a jar that I had in the fridge of some pickles and things that they were not sealed. So I was keeping them in the refrigerator, but I'm actually going to recan them by putting them in in those last two jars. So this is like pickled onions, cucumber pickles, things like that. So I'm just using an itty bitty spoon in lieu of a debubbler because I don't know where my debubbler is. But just trying to get some air bubbles out, making sure there's no pockets of air inside the cucumbers or the pickles or anything else. Okay, here's the bread in another day or so from when I first mixed it. It's very, very spongy, kind of oily. It's a very different texture from my normal rustic bread, which is a good sign. I'm hopeful that it's going to work. There's some more of that grease. I found it works really well for greasing pans. So after putting these in the pans, I'm going to allow it to rise a little bit more and see if it will create the shape of a loaf of bread. So we're going to find out. Okay, here's the pickled peppers after they came out of the water bath canner, and here is the bread after it rose again. Well, that's all I had for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next week.